You know that moment when you're absolutely certain you're right? That feeling of complete confidence in your position? Well, what if that certainty itself was the problem? Today, we're exploring the fascinating Sikh perspective on ego and humility in leadership, and how it might completely change how you think about power and success. By the end of this episode, you'll understand why humility isn't weakness, and how ego shows up in ways you'd never expect.
And it's such a crucial topic, especially when we look at how leadership operates today. The Sikh tradition offers some really profound insights here that go way beyond just saying, don't be arrogant.
Let's start with the basics. How does Sikh thought view humility? Because I feel like we often think of it as just being modest or self-effacing.
That's actually a really common misconception. In Sikh thought, humility, or Nimrata, isn't about being meek or erasing yourself. It's about understanding your true position in relation to everything else.
What do you mean by true position?
Well, it's about recognizing that whatever capacity you have, your talents, your achievements, your leadership abilities, they flow through you, not from you. You're not the source, you're more like a channel.
That's fascinating. So it's less about downplaying yourself and more about proper perspective?
Exactly. And this is where it gets really interesting for leaders. Because when you're in a position of authority, maintaining that perspective becomes incredibly challenging.
Why is that?
Because leadership tends to magnify whatever's already present. If your humility is just for show, leadership will expose that. If your ego is unchecked, authority will amplify it.
That's a bit unsettling, isn't it? Like leadership is some kind of spiritual stress test.
That's actually a perfect way to put it. And here's where Sikh thought gets really nuanced. It's not just about obvious ego or arrogance.
What do you mean?
Well, in Sikh philosophy, ego, or Ahankar, is much subtler than just being full of yourself. It's about identification itself, the quiet belief that I am the doer, the knower, the owner of outcomes.
So you could be doing all the right things but still be operating from ego?
Exactly. And this is where it gets really tricky. Ego is actually most dangerous when it's paired with good intentions.
Wait, what? Why is that?
Because when we're doing something wrong, it's easier to catch ourselves. But when we're doing something right, ego can sneak in wearing the clothes of righteousness or moral certainty.
That's fascinating. So how does this play out in actual leadership situations?
Well, think about how leaders respond to criticism. When ego is in play, even constructive feedback feels like an attack. Questions feel like betrayal.
Oh, I've definitely seen that happen.
Right? And here's where Sikh practices offer some practical wisdom. Take seva, for instance, the practice of selfless service.
How does that help with leadership?
It's not just about the act of service itself. It's about what regular service erodes over time. It interrupts ego's narrative of superiority and replaces it with relationship.
That's really powerful. But let's talk about something practical. How do you maintain humility when you actually are good at what you do?
That's where another Sikh concept comes in, the idea of being the pust of the feet of all.
That sounds pretty extreme.
But here's the key. It's not about diminishing yourself. It's about finding dignity in service rather than status.
Can you give an example of what that looks like in practice?
Think about the tradition of langar, where everyone, regardless of status, sits together on the floor to eat. Leaders serve alongside everyone else.
But how does that translate to modern leadership contexts?
It's about creating environments where authority doesn't mean separation, where being in charge doesn't mean being above feedback or learning.
You mentioned earlier about service becoming identity. Can you expand on that?
This is one of the most subtle traps for leaders. It starts with genuine service, but over time, that service becomes your role and eventually your self-definition.
And that's problematic?
Yes, because when service becomes identity, letting go feels like erasure. Stepping aside feels like loss. Your ego has found a new, more subtle way to take control.
That's really insightful. It's like ego can hijack even our best intentions.
Exactly. And this is why Sikh wisdom emphasizes constant self-examination. Not from a place of self-doubt, but from a place of honest reflection.
Let's talk about something practical. How do you actually maintain this balance in high-pressure situations?
There's this beautiful Sikh concept called Simran, remembrance. It's about constantly reconnecting with something larger than yourself.
How does that help in leadership moments?
It helps you stay grounded. When you're facing a crucial decision or dealing with success, it reminds you that you're part of something bigger than your own achievements or failures.
That's fascinating. But let's be real, isn't there a risk of becoming too humble? Of not owning your authority when needed?
This is where people often misunderstand Sikh humility. It's not about being passive or weak. Remember, the same tradition that teaches humility also emphasizes standing up against injustice.
So how do you balance that?
It's about understanding that true authority comes from service, not status. You can be both humble and powerful. In fact, that combination is what makes leadership truly effective.
You mentioned earlier about ego being subtle. What are some warning signs leaders should watch for?
One big one is when you start feeling that critique is always wrong and you're always right. When you stop being curious about other perspectives.
That makes sense. Any others?
Another is when you start seeing your role as indispensable. When you can't imagine the organization or project succeeding without you.
Oh, that's a good one. I've definitely seen leaders fall into that trap.
And here's where Sikh wisdom offers something really powerful, the concept of hukam, or divine will. It's this recognition that ultimately, you're not in control of everything.
That sounds like it could be really freeing, actually.
Exactly. When you stop trying to control everything and instead focus on serving well, leadership becomes less of a burden and more of a privilege.
Let's talk about success for a moment. How do you handle it when things are going really well?
This is actually when humility is most important and most challenging. Success can be more spiritually dangerous than failure.
Why is that?
Because success tends to confirm our ego's story about ourselves. It's harder to maintain perspective when everything seems to prove you're right.
So what's the antidote?
Regular practices of service and remembrance. In Sikh tradition, no matter how successful you become, you still tie your own turban each day, still serve in the langar, still sit on the floor with everyone else.
That's beautiful. It's like built-in reminders of humility.
Yes, and these aren't just religious practices, they're practical tools for maintaining perspective in leadership.
As we wrap up, what's the key message you want leaders to take away from this Sikh wisdom?
That humility isn't a weakness to overcome, it's a strength to cultivate. And that the most powerful leadership comes not from inflating the ego, but from transcending it through service.
That's really powerful. And I love how practical these insights are, despite coming from such an ancient tradition.
Because they're dealing with fundamental human challenges that haven't changed. The settings might be different, but the core struggles with ego and humility remain the same.
This has been fascinating. Any final thoughts?
Just remember, true humility isn't thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. And that's when real leadership begins.
What a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us, where we've learned that sometimes the strongest leadership comes from knowing when to step back.
And remember, next time you feel absolutely certain you're right, that might be exactly the moment to pause and reflect.